is a self-care and leadership coach and the founder of Homecoming, a 6-month coaching program that teaches big dreaming, high capacity women how to care for themselves without guilt. Let us give a warm milestone welcome to Jamie Greenwood.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be starting our morning together. Oh wait, it's already up there. There we go. So today we're going to be talking about getting better with boundaries. While I would say I'm pretty good at boundaries now, it's been a 10-year journey of getting better with them and coming back to my ability to be able to set them. Now, there was a time when I was really good at setting boundaries, and I was about 3. And you'll notice if either you have children, nieces and nephews, or just are around children between the ages of like 1 and 4 are really good with boundaries. They know what they want, they know what they don't want, they know what they're going to eat, they know what they're not going to eat. They know who is allowed to touch them and who's not allowed to touch them, right? As adults, we find this very annoying. But the truth is that they are boundary experts. And then what happens? We grow, we become more socialized, and become impacted by society, by culture, by our family. And suddenly we believe that it's our job not to care about what we want, what we need, what we want to create in the world, but what do they think? What do they want? How do I keep just all this just happy and fine and good? How do I just like smooth this all over? And what happens is that when we start moving towards people pleasing and smoothing things over no matter what, we become kind of boundaryless. We become people that are always orienting to the other, right? And I'm going to be saying a lot about how like you shouldn't do that. If we if all of us decided not to orient to the other, we would all be like sociopaths. Like it's actually really good that we care about other people. But what tends to happen is that becomes number one over and over and over and over again. And suddenly we don't know where we start and where we stop. We only know ourselves in relation to what everyone else thinks and feels. So there are 2 things that I want you to keep in mind for this session. Number one is that this is an open dialogue. I'm going to be asking you questions. You're going to be talking to each other. If you have a question throughout, please just raise your hand. I know we're in this fancy room, but like pretend you're in my living room and we're just like getting into it, okay? And then the second thing I want you to know is that boundaries, setting boundaries, they live in our bodies. It's a somatic experience. Oftentimes, our bodies know that we need to set a boundary before our brain has a chance to, right? Like something happens, someone said something, someone gets a little too close, your body's like, whoa, right? That's your body being like, boundary now. Now's a good time, right? But because we don't have a lot of training in boundaries, we tend to, just smooth over or back up or not, my favorite thing, circle back. You can always circle back and set a boundary. It doesn't always have to be in the moment. All right. So with that, to get into our bodies, because I really want you by the end of this to feel this in your bones, we're going to take a moment to do an exercise to get into here, okay? So please kind of adjust yourself in a comfortable position. We can put pens down. We can just, if you feel safe and comfortable, close your eyes. Then you can place a hand on a part of your body that needs a little bit of attention. Maybe it's your neck, it's your heart, it's your belly. You've been holding a lot in the last 24 hours and for the majority of your life. So just take a few big, deep breaths here, closing your eyes, breathing in, lifting up, breathing out, settling down. Again, breathing in, expanding, breathing out, grounding. And as you continue with these breaths, breathing in, lifting up, breathing out, dropping, just begin to notice what's happening in your body. Where might there be some tingling, some heat, some cold, maybe a little bit of tension. Maybe you feel nothing. That is information too. Just tracking from your head, down your shoulders, your back, legs, feet. What's happening? What are the sensations that you can notice? And as you begin to notice these sensations, bring your attention now to the part of your body that feels best. What's the part of your body that feels best? Maybe it's your left pinky, your right elbow. This is a place where there are no aches and pains, a place where there might even be a little bit of peace. And from this place of bestness, I want you to use your breath to expand it. Breathing into that body part and expanding that sensation, that feeling of best, out and out and out and out, covering now the entire length of your body. Breathing into the pulsing of that bestness. And noticing what comes along with it. Confidence, alignment, maybe connection to your voice. When your body is at its best, what else is possible? And from this place of bestness, taking another big, deep breath in, letting it out. And when you're ready, you can come back into the room. Okay, so from here, what are boundaries? What are boundaries? Why are they important? So one of the definitions that came to me the other night, I'm like, who here tries to go to sleep and then gets smacked in the head with an idea or a thought or, yeah. So I'm in bed and I'm like, what are boundaries? It's like, boundaries are vulnerable statements that declare a need, a desire, or a request. They are vulnerable statements that declare a need, a desire, or a request. This is just what came to me. They're also these. This is a quote by Prentice Hemphill, who is an author, facilitator, incredible somatic practitioner. And what they say is boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and me simultaneously. This is one of my favorite ways of describing boundaries, because oftentimes we can get really scared of setting boundaries for fear of looking selfish. And what their quote reminds us is that it's actually just like an equation where I'm here and you're here and we're both valuable, but what's the difference? What's the distance at which I can remain in love with myself and you, right? So we remain in respect. We remain in connection, right? Boundaries done well, done skillfully, connect. They do not sever. This is a longer one, but I'll paraphrase. They also say that boundaries give us the space to do the work of loving ourselves. They might actually be the first fundamental expression of self-love, right? When we can remember ourselves in the midst of everything else that is going on, right? And not that I like to think that I'm the most important, but not that, we're the most important, but that we matter too. That's really what boundaries are about. It's not that we have to be on top and get our way all the time. It's that can we work ourselves back into the equation, right? We matter too. All right, so this is a fantastic book, if you haven't heard of it, by a therapist named Nedra Glover Tawwab. It's called Set Boundaries and Find Peace. And we're going to get into, I know, so good, right? I know, so good. And she has a new book coming out too. And we're going to get into the 6 different types of boundaries that she names. That said, there are all different types of boundaries. One of the boundaries I was just mentioning to someone this morning is technology. Like, I have a very hard technology boundary. I took Instagram off my phone, everyone. Please know that it is possible. And I did it. Thank you. But that was my technology boundary. I'm not going to be getting into technology boundaries now, but just so you know, boundaries can look like anything. They're all different types. So these are not set in stone and written in blood. But they're a good place to start. They're a really good place to start. So the 6 kinds of boundaries. Physical, this is about personal space and physical touch. I also on the slides put down some language that you might want to use if these are ones that you struggle with. I also want to say the reason why this is titled Getting Better with Boundaries is that I'm sure there are places in your life where you are really excelling at certain types of boundaries. And there are places in your life where you're like, ooh, I need more help here. And so we're going to be getting into that. I want you to be thinking, where am I really good at this? Where am I good at boundaries? And then which of these do I need a little help on? Okay, so physical. Another piece around boundaries. So I'm gonna tell you a little story. All right, this is a pre-COVID story, okay? So I was at a conference and I was meeting people, and I like to think of myself as like warm and like maybe even a little touchy, not handsy, okay? And so someone was introduced to me and I was like, oh, and I like kind of like went in for the hug, and she stepped back and she said, I'm not a hugger. And oh, it hurt. Oh, it hurt so bad. I felt rejected. I was ashamed. I was embarrassed. And in that moment, I was mad too. I was like, oh, I can't believe she just did that to me. And then as I reflected, I respected her boundary. I didn't, I was like, okay, fair. But as I thought about it, what I realized is that that person had a very clear boundary, and my pain around it was actually my lack of boundariness. Usually, when someone sets a boundary and we're pained by it, it's because we aren't doing very good boundary work. The best way to think about boundaries when we're giving and receiving them is kind of from a neutral place. And so when someone sets a boundary like that, a physical, very simple boundary, and we're like, ow, okay, why am I experiencing pain in this moment? It's because I feel rejected, but also it's because I don't believe that people, like everyone, I just believe everyone should be huggers, right? Like that, like, when you like get to the deeper parts of it, I'm like, oh, I believe everyone should be huggers. Well, that's not fair, right? And so we start to do our own inner work when we are both trying to set boundaries, but also how we react to other people as they set theirs. All right, the second one is sexual. This is touching, making sexual comments, or engaging in acts without consent. Number 3 is intellectual. Now, this one, the first 2 tend to be pretty straightforward, though not always easy to navigate. This one, intellectual, and the next, emotional, can be a little fuzzy, can be a little tricky. So intellectual boundaries are around staying aware of appropriate and inappropriate topics, right? Let's say you're at dinner with some people that you know have different views than you on certain things, and they don't want to talk about those certain things, like that's been made very clear, let's say in previous dinners, and you don't care, and you just want to get into it, that would be you crossing an intellectual boundary of theirs, right? Or, of course, vice versa, someone doing that to you, right? And so, ways of setting intellectual boundaries. I don't want to talk about that right now. You know, we actually had this conversation last year and it didn't go well. Let's move on. Okay, great. So, an emotional boundary. Emotional boundaries tend to be the ones that we need to offer ourselves the most, especially as founders and entrepreneurs. We're fast, we're real fast, and we don't love processing our feelings. They are messy and time consuming. Okay, so, but this is the problem, is that if we don't take a little bit of time and create some boundaries around our own need for emotional well-being, we start crossing our own emotional boundaries and other people's emotional boundaries. So, an emotional boundary would be protecting emotions and feelings, being sensitive and expecting other people to be sensitive, not fearful, not avoiding things out of fear, but just sensitive to like what's happening in the room. This can also, emotional boundaries are very helpful when you are in a room with an oversharer. Has anyone been in a room with an oversharer? Has anyone been an oversharer? Yeah. Okay. So we take on all roles. We do all these things, right? And so it's also very interesting to know, like, where in my life do I tend to possibly cross other people's emotional boundaries, or where in my life am I not upholding my own emotional boundaries, right? This doesn't mean that we don't share vulnerably with people, but part of healthy boundaries is sharing vulnerably with people who have earned it, not just anyone. Yes. Okay. Material boundary is just your stuff. How are you with setting boundaries around your things? I had a client, I run leadership circles for women entrepreneurs, and we do an entire month. Big, one more time. Big, deep dive into boundaries. And we're talking about material boundaries. And there was one of the women where she was like, I am terrible at material boundaries. And I was like, in my coaching way, I'm like, say more. And she's like, I don't return stuff. Like, if someone like lends me a jacket, like I just kind of keep it. And I was like, wow. I was like, when was the last time a friend let you borrow something? She's like, it's been years. And I was like, right, because you have terrible material boundaries. I said it in a kind way. She's working on it. She's much better. Or siblings, exactly. Wait, but these are things just to notice, like, how am I, she didn't even realize that she was a major material boundary offender. She really felt like everyone was always crossing her boundaries, and then got her close to, you kind of do your own thing over here, right? Okay. And then lastly, time. Yes. Time boundaries, I would say, I think that we struggle with different types of boundaries at different times in our life. I think that when we're young, physical or sexual boundaries can be a little tough to manage. And then we get older and suddenly it's like intellectual and emotional. And then we become business owners and time boundaries are like impossible, right? So, language to use. I'm just not able to do that. I don't have any tattoos, but if I did have one, it would say, I'm just not able to do that for you right now because I have to go take a nap. Okay. I can help you with something, and my fee is ... I am more than willing to help you with that. And my fee is... Yes, you can pick my brain. The cost for that is... right? Right. And how do we deliver that? How do we deliver that statement, right? With love and understanding, because it's a moment to teach. You hope that whoever is wanting to pick your brain will be great enough that in 10 years someone wants to pick their brain, and they are also being paid for that time, right? Okay. Also, what? Fear of missing out. Tell me more about that. Oh, time, yes. I never think about that one because I have no fear of missing out on anything. That actually might be its own issue. But yes, fear of missing out. So we say yes to things constantly because we don't want to miss out. We don't, especially from a business owner's perspective. I don't know if you guys ever have this, but like you're like, I have to go to that event because what if there's that person? There's that one person who's going to change everything for me, right? Okay, so that happens. I think that especially we're not post-pandemic, but you know what I'm saying. We do have to get out there more, and look at us. We're in this room. I'm very proud of all of us for being here. We do have to get out more and noticing that if your calendar is looking insane and there is no time to eat, sleep, or drink water, you're doing. We need some time boundaries. We need some time boundaries. We need some time boundaries. In my circle, at the beginning, we were writing down the five things that I see myself as a founder, and then five more. Healthy was written down a few times. Healthy. Good time boundaries help with our health. Right? Yes. Okay. So those are the 6 types. Now we're getting into the tiers of boundaries. This is kind of like how we hold these things. So there's 3 different tiers of boundaries. There is porous, rigid, and healthy. Now, people that hold porous boundaries tend to be people pleasers. You can be a people pleaser. You might be an oversharer. You tend to say nothing when there is mistreatment towards yourself or maybe even others. You just try and keep it real easy, right? Now, porous boundaries can also look like setting a boundary and then walking away and just hoping it'll just stay up there on its own. And unfortunately, boundaries are things that have to be reworked and reinforced over and over and over again. And this I've had to learn the hard way, but I'm going to tell you now so you don't have to learn it, you'll just get it. Is that when you remember that boundaries have to be reinforced and reworked again and again and again, when someone tries to cross a boundary that you've already set, you won't lose your mind. You're just like, oh, right, I just needed to reinforce that for you. Let me remind you, right? Because I can't tell you how many times I've set a boundary and thought like, ooh, we're done now. And then they cross it and you're like, really? Oh, it's on. Boundaries? No, now it's just on, right? So remembering that they are living, breathing things, these boundaries. We have to tend to them. We have to care for them. All right, so that's porous. Now, rigid, I actually lean towards rigid boundaries personally. But what happens when we're starting to set boundaries, especially if we tended to be a more like boundaryless person or struggle with boundaries, we go straight to rigid, right? We're like, nope, I said it and there's no movement on this. Now, sometimes rigid boundaries are necessary. Let's just be honest with that. Sometimes people have a hard time hearing, they have a hard time listening, they have a hard time respecting, and so we have to set a very rigid boundary. However, if we stay too close or hold on too tight to rigid boundaries, they begin to look like stringent rules, avoiding vulnerability, like not being honest, just kind of like stonewalling people. Also, like incredibly high expectations for ourselves and others that often they're not able to meet. So if we don't want to be kind of like wobbly in porous boundaries or too tight or rigid with rigid boundaries, what are healthy boundaries? Healthy boundaries are, it's when you're clear on your values. And the reason why we did that connection exercise in the beginning of you getting connected to feeling best in your body is that when we feel best in our body, we have enough space to reconnect to our values. And when we're connected to our values, we generally feel unwavering. Like the wind can be blowing and we're just there. And Brene Brown has a great phrase. It it wasn't about boundaries, but I'm going to use it for boundaries, where she talks about don't puff up, don't shrink, stand your sacred ground. This is how we deliver healthy boundaries. We don't want to shrink, which is kind of like porous. Oh, would you mind just maybe not doing that? Right? We don't puff up where we're now cussing at someone. We just stand our sacred ground. And we care, but there's also kind of a neutrality, a stableness, an ability to be unwavering in whatever happens, which is so important as a founder, right? Because all kinds of things come at you. You're like, right? If we can just stay here, it helps. Last thing I want to say about healthy boundaries is that healthy boundaries are those where you are able to both give and receive a no. Going back to my earlier story about how I was so crushed when someone didn't want to give me a hug, that was poor boundaries on my part, not only by crossing their boundaries or attempting to, but by not being able to handle what was a reasonable no. So I just wanted to, I'll just take a moment and check in around, where are boundaries easy for me? Are they easier at work or are they easier at home? Right? Family boundaries is the work of our lives. It is the work of our lives. I'm so tempted to just tell you all about the boundaries I had to set with my dad, but I won't because that is unprofessional. But I will say that that man just keeps coming. And I'm like, nope, the line's right there. Shit. Oh, sorry. Oh, the line's right there. And it's why I see that boundaries are living, breathing things, because we can set a boundary with a family member, and let's say they respect it for 7 months, and then month 8, and they forget. He actually said he forgot. I can't even. They forget, and then they cross the boundary again. And you're like, wow, okay. So this is why it's so important. Going back to when I said time boundary is a way in which we take care of our health. It's why we have to be healthy. Health is required. Physical health, mental health, emotional health, soul health, essential for boundary setting, both at work and absolutely at home. And when we're talking, especially home boundaries, anyone experience guilt? Shame? Yeah, which has its own layers and levels of heaviness that we then have to work through. We could be here all day talking about this. But what I want to say just is that we have to remember again and again that we are here to live our own lives. They have theirs, and they're doing what they want to do with those. And then we have ours. And unfortunately, sometimes they intersect, and we're like, all right, how are we going to do that dance? But if we can remember that we have to live for us first, really, like oxygen mask first and all that stuff, we're then more able to be present for those more trying members in our family. Why don't we set these things? One, we really want to be nice. First, some of us. Some of us really want to be nice. But nice gets us into trouble. Nice gets us walked over a lot. Also, nice doesn't train anyone. As this person was saying, I've trained my family. We kind of have to train people how to treat us. And niceness is just kind of an open door of she's cool. Whatever. I can bring whatever to this person. So I like to think of myself as a nice person. But I am also very clear on what works and what doesn't work for me. And I know what works and what doesn't work for me, again, by going back to those values. What do I care about? That's another question to be asking yourself regularly. If you feel like you're being bombarded and you need to set some very clear boundaries, what matters to me most? And how do I let that inform what I want to come out of my mouth? And then what do I need to do to feel brave to let those things leave my mouth? So, we can add to these, but these are generally the reasons why we don't set boundaries. We are afraid of causing harm. This is the nice thing. We don't want to hurt anyone. We really don't want to hurt anyone. Though, if you've noticed by everyone's example, many people don't have a problem. No one's worrying about your feelings. No one has a problem crossing your boundaries, but we're very concerned about other people's, which in some ways is very good. And we're afraid of causing harm. We're afraid of being harmed. This is the retaliation piece, right? We're worried about people's perceptions. What are they going to think of me if I say this thing or do this thing, say no to this? Also, rejection, withholding, and no longer belonging. You know, this really gets into family stuff. It's like, if I say this thing, do I still belong here? Am I still allowed to be here? Many other reasons why you might not set a boundary or why you struggle with them. Yes. I really appreciate, thank you. I really appreciate you saying this. I say that a lot, that no is a complete sentence. And no one ever told you that before because it would not serve our culture or society. Can you imagine if women were constantly being like, no, not like, it would all just collapse. It would all collapse, okay? Like, this thing runs with us being amenable and like doing things and working hard and saying, sure, put more on my plate. And like, yeah, I can do more, right? And all of that hard work it's wonderful and it's important and we are incredibly accomplished. But if we also don't know how to use our sacred no, it's really hard to stay on track for what we want to be saying yes to, right? It's like there was another hand. Yes. That's exactly right. And I would also say what we need changes in every moment depending on who we're in a room with, right? Yes. Thank you for naming that. Yeah. Yes. Hmm. Yes, yes, yes. I thank you for naming this. Okay. So for a very long time, I had poor boundaries because I just told myself that I was like higher and better. Like, no, 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 like I'm being compassionate. Like, you know, it just doesn't affect me, right? Like, no, it's that is a slippery slope. And I think that we are able to hold love, compassion, we're empathy, we're able to hold these things without also being taken advantage of regularly. I we also have to remember again that we are allowed to be in the equation as someone who deserves love, compassion, and empathy. It's not just other people that deserve those things, right? So there's no easy answer with any of this stuff, but I will say that we have to kind of balance it out. And if we find ourselves offering endless compassion, love, and empathy to others, and so one of the ways that you know that you need to institute some more boundaries is if you are overworked, overwhelmed, no time on your calendar, exhausted, and secretly very resentful. Okay? So if you are feeling any of those things, that is a sign that you need to work yourself into the equation of love and compassion and empathy as well. But that faith piece is hard. It's tricky. Yes. I mean, I have a 4-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 14-year-old that is too many children. But when any of them ask me for any number of things, I usually say yes, but sometimes I say no. And the 14-year-old is like, "Why are you being so mean to me? Why are you being mean to me?" I'm like, "I'm not being mean to you. I'm giving you the opportunity to figure it out. Be resourceful. Show me what you can do." Like a no can be an invitation. It can be so many things. It's not just a "I won't help you." It's I'm giving you the opportunity to show me what you can do. Stretch a little. Yes. Yeah. An enthusiastic yes. Like rest. So are you kidding me? 5 minutes? All right. So so Zoe was like, "Can you stay a little bit later? I have something to get. Like, do you have anything happening after this?" And I was like, "No, I have nothing happening after this because while I love this and I love you, it exhausts me. And so after this, I'm going to eat lunch and take a nap." And so I say that because before we can set boundaries, we often have to do a lot of replenishing. We have to do a lot of replenishing before we can really get into the sticky ones, right? Some boundaries are very easy, but some of them are real sticky and real complicated. And it's hard to know because there's fear in there too. It's hard to know is am I afraid because there is legitimate harm, or am I just afraid because it's a human reaction to be afraid to be rejected, to afraid to be left out in the cold, right? Like really doing some digging as to what is the fear and is it real or is this just kind of